People who grew up rich. When did you realize you were living in a bubble and not like everyone else? 1. I'm not super rich, but things really hit home when I was with a friend and his mother started to panic because she couldn't afford milk for her toddler son, my friend's little brother. I was just walking around with $40 in my pocket for no real reason, so I gave her $20. She was embarrassed to be taking money from a 13-year-old, but swallowed her pride for the sake of her children. I knew my friend wasn't as well off, but it never fully hit me what that meant before then. To me, being poor just meant someone couldn't afford nice things. What it meant to struggle with basic necessities like milk never really struck me before then. 2. I did not grow up rich. But my husband did. His sister once said, I didn't know everyone didn't live in big houses until I went off to college. Apparently, she led a very sheltered life. 3. I realized when I went to college and had friends who were complaining about student loans. 4. When I started talking in school about the pros and cons of Disney World versus Disneyland, and people were like, you've been on vacation. Lucky. 5. Conversely, I remember a summer where me and my mom lived in a car, and I thought it was the coolest thing. Turns out we were just homeless. Meanwhile, in university, there was a guy who didn't understand why we didn't all have our own condos right by the school. He also never understood why we didn't have money to go to Mexico on reading break and would just tell us to ask for a bigger allowance from our trust. He learned to just stop talking after someone fed him a left hook when he made a comment about how stupid we were for taking out student loans and not just paying tuition up front. 6. I was about 12, I think. When friends would come over, they would go on and on about how big the house was and how I had more games and computers than them. They especially seemed freaked out about the maid. I just started to realize that I didn't have the same circumstances as most. They wouldn't all say it if it weren't true, I assume. I did have other friends with money, especially when I started attending private school, but I didn't realize they were well off either. 7. The first time I went to my best friend's house. His circumstances were the exact opposite. His parents tried their best, but his dad often didn't have much work during the winter, and his mom didn't work outside of the home. They had 6 kids and usually had things like pancakes for dinner. I'm in an upper-class part of DC, with every toy and electronic imaginable, and he had none. It was a good lesson for me to learn, but it was a shame that it was at the expense of a person I loved so very much. 8. This isn't a great response because I didn't grow up rich, but rather very poor. I met my first best friend in grade 6. When she brought me to her home, I was flabbergasted. They had a vacuum that plugged into their walls. They could even vacuum downstairs with it. She had a trampoline and Xbox. I begged each time to play with both. She had a small alcove with a mini fridge that was full of ice pops and different sodas. That was cool. I remember thinking I should take more than one because I wouldn't get another chance. When they invited me over for dinner, her mom always made me take extra because I was nervous to ask for seconds. I couldn't believe the amount of food in the house, and we all would have a huge glass of milk with dinner. Milk was always a treat, and being able to drink as much as I wanted was so overwhelming. I just remember being astounded by everything, and 3 years later they adopted me. 9. I was talking to a friend about going to the town's public beach, and they were saying how horribly crowded it gets in summer. I suddenly realized that I had never had to go to a public beach because I always had at least 2 private family beaches to go to, one with cabanas, outdoor showers, and space for cooking. I always had taken it for granted. 10. Not rich, but in high school, there was this one kid who wore the same shoes from sophomore to senior year. I kept telling him to buy a new pair, but he would claim that they were broken in and he didn't want to waste money on uncomfortable ones. So I decided to do that thing where the class would surprise him with a new pair of Vans for his birthday. But when I asked our classmates to chip in, they all said they didn't have any money to spare. That didn't make sense because most of them had after-school jobs. That's when I found out I was the only kid in class who wasn't working to help support their own family.